A huge German shepherd with dull fur, one clouded white eye, and a deep scar across his body sat in the darkest kennel. His muzzle, his name tag, just said Bruno. Why is he back here? He's not popular, he's old, half-blind, doesn't like to be touched. Ella said quietly, and the woman hesitated. I want this one. Ella knelt down in front of the kennel, and Bruno calmly observed her without moving, growling, or barking. Henry blinked. Darling, are you certain there aren't other people who make me think of my mother? Her voice remained steady, as everyone ignored her due to the chair. But she noticed me, and I believe you will too. The shelter worker glanced at Henry, uncertain that she would change her mind, and he whispered softly. As they completed the papers, Bruno didn't react. He didn't wag his tail or lick Ella's hand. But when they opened the door to depart, he got up slowly and obeyed their silent communication without a leash or order. When they arrived home, Bruno didn't wander around or wag his tail. Instead, he walked slowly through the hallway and lay down under the living room window, where the soft, golden light streamed in. He stayed there for days. Ella didn't press him. She just sat on the floor close by and waited for it to happen. Ella sat across from Bruno in silence. Her lips pressed tight, fists clenched in her lap. She felt adrift in a world that no longer made sense. The loss of her mother had left a void that nothing seemed to fill. But then there was something the way Bruno's unwavering gaze mirrored the comforting presence her mother once provided, offering silent support. Through her tears, the way he tilted his head when she whispered to herself, just like her mom, used to the way his scar ran across his muzzle, just like the surgical scar on her mother's neck. It was strange, but in those details Ella found echoes, not a replacement for her mother, but reminders, threads connecting her grief to something still here. And that made it easier to speak not to people, but to Bruno. So one evening she began to talk. She told him about her mom, about the songs she used to sing, the way she made pancakes shaped like stars, how she'd braid Ella's hair, even when her hands trembled. Bruno didn't respond, not with a bark, not even a twitch of his tail, but his good eye followed Ella's every movement. And that was enough. Day after day, Ella returned to that spot. She talked while doing homework, while sketching, while brushing her doll's hair. And always Bruno listened. Sometimes she'd cry, especially when she talked about the hospital, the wheelchair, the quiet after the last goodbye. And Bruno, old and tired, would lift his head just enough to rest it on her knee. That small gesture became everything. Henry watched from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, unsure whether his heart was breaking or healing. In Bruno, it had only been a week, but already Ella had stopped staring out the window and was sitting next to it telling stories. For the first time since Claire passed, the house didn't feel so empty. In the days that followed, Bruno also changed. Instead of spending all day by the window, he started to wander the house, sticking his head into Henry's workshop and curling up next to Ella's bed at night. His tail, which had been motionless and stiff, started to thump softly whenever Ella entered the room, and Ella had resumed humming and occasionally even laughing, as well as making little surprised noises that escaped without warning. Bruno would nudging her hand with his nose, then, as if to say, "There you are." The grief didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip, and in that little house filled with sawdust, sunlight, and second chances, both of them began to feel a little less broken. It started with a walk. Henry had suggested they get some fresh air. Bruno needed to move his legs. And Ella, while she hadn't been outside much since the funeral, the park wasn't far. Trees stood bare against the sky, their branches like open hands, leaves scattered across the path. As Ella walked slowly, Bruno trotting beside her, his pace gentle to match hers. That's when she saw him, a boy maybe her age, sitting on a bench near the duck pond. He wore oversized headphones and clutched a fidget toy tightly in both hands. His eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking. I was slow. Bruno stopped too, sensing her change. She looked at the boy, then at Bruno. The old dog was calm, still as good. I watching the boy with quiet curiosity. Ella didn't say a word. She simply walked closer and sat on the grass, leaving space between them. Bruno lay next to her, and the boy looked at the dog for a brief moment before turning away. The following day, they returned, and this time, Liam, as she later discovered, was there, and each time Bruno would lie a little closer. By the fourth visit, Liam reached out, not much more than a tentative hand resting near Bruno's paw. But Bruno didn't move, but his tail made one slow, heavy thump against the ground. She didn't say anything, but she simply smiled and allowed the silence to stretch between them like a warm blanket. She wasn't yet aware of Liam's story, But she understood what it was like to feel alone, and somehow they were creating something new, wordless but real, right there in the quiet of falling leaves and soft dog breath. It happened slowly, as most important things do. Liam never said a word, neither to Ella nor to Bruno, and his parents had tried every kind of therapy medication or special programs. But nothing had worked until Bruno, every afternoon, Ella and Bruno went back to the same spot in the park, where Liam was always sitting by himself with his headphones protecting his silence. At first, Bruno just lay there, calm and present, until one day Liam brought a cracker, broken in half, and placed one piece on the bench next to him. At first, Bruno approached slowly, tail low, eyes kind, and he took the offering gently. He then sat beside Liam and their shoulders, barely touching them. Bruno wasn't like the other dogs Liam had encountered in therapy programs. He didn't bark for attention or push for pets. Instead, he waited. There was something about Bruno that felt old, not just in his age, but in his presence, and he didn't need words or gestures. He just knew Liam couldn't understand him, not in the way Ella did. "Bruno doesn't need you to talk," she replied softly. "He just needs you to sit with him, that's how he talks." She went on to become the interpreter, and Liam did not do it every day without difficulty. But gradually he came to understand the comfort Bruno provided, not his emptiness, and he stepped into that silence with him. The following day, Liam reached out and stroked Bruno's ear, causing him to tremble tentatively. Bruno leaned in, and Liam smiled. Not loudly, not wide, but real. The following day, Liam whispered something so soft that Ella could hardly hear it. But Bruno heard his ears twitch, and Liam repeated it. Just one word, dog, but it reverberated miraculously. Liam's mother arrived with tears in her eyes and knelt next to her son, crying into his shoulder. Ella moved aside to give him the opportunity. Bruno stayed, still, head resting against Liam's knee, and for the first time Liam didn't flinch at the touch and silence that followed. Something had shifted, not just in Liam, but in everyone watching. One word, and a dog who waited long enough to hear it. Ellen had always thought of Bruno as hers. He was the gift her father gave her. When the world felt like it had taken everything else, he was comfort, memory, and silence that understood. But something shifted the day Liam spoke. Ella saw it in Bruno's eyes, not pride, not exactly, but presence, like he knew he had done something important. From that moment on, Ella began to see things differently. When she looked at Liam, she didn't just see a quiet boy with noise-canceling headphones. She saw someone trying every day to reach out from behind the glass wall that life had put between him and the world, and somehow she and Bruno had helped crack it. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something steady, something that stayed. Henry also noticed that one evening when he found Ella sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open and a pencil moving slowly across the page. He asked, "What are you working on?" Her voice was quiet. "But sure, I think I want to help kids like Liam." She said, "I think Bruno helped me see that." Henry smiled and sat next to her, saying, "Maybe that's why he came into our lives." He said, "Not just for you, but for what comes after." Ella looked at Bruno, who was lying curled near the stove, breathing deeply, and even though he didn't stir, his presence filled the room with warmth. For the first time, Ella felt something new blooming inside her, not just healing, but purposeful. The leaves changed, the air grew colder, but they continued to arrive every afternoon like clockwork. It had become customary for Bruno and Liam to find their way to the same park bench. Liam would bring his fidget toys, while Ella would bring a sketch pad. As winter arrived, they wrapped up scarves, gloves, thermoses of cocoa, and other items. On some days, they sat in silence, and on other days, they spoke well. Liam would nod or gesture, and occasionally even murmur a word or two. Liam began smiling more. He'd meet Ella's eyes now, sometimes even reach for her hand when he was overwhelmed. Ella had grown too, her voice had softened, but her confidence deepened. She was no longer just a girl who had lost her mother. She was a friend, a guide, a bridge. Henry watched them from his workbench by the window, often pausing mid-sandpaper stroke, just to take in the sight. "You three look like a painting," he said once, something worth remembering. Bruno had started to slow down. He still came along, still watched over Liam with the same unwavering gaze, but his steps were stiffer. Now his rest lasted longer. Ella noticed she didn't say anything, but she started drawing more pictures of Bruno curled up, watching, waiting. And as spring whispered its way back into the world, she knew something was shifting again. Time was moving, and they were all moving with it. It was a quiet morning, and late spring sunlight poured through the windows of their home, casting golden pools across the floor. Bruno lay in his usual spot near the stove, his breath slow and shallow. Ellen knew. She had known for weeks the way he struggled to stand, how his steps wobbled, the deep sighs that escaped him more often. Henry had called the vet. They wouldn't make him suffer, not Bruno. That morning Ella sat on the floor beside him, her back against the cabinets. She held his paw, gently tracing the old scars with her thumb. "Remember the park?" she whispered, and Liam's first word, Bruno's ear twitched barely. "I wasn't ready to say goodbye to Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "but this time I think I understand." Henry sat behind her, one hand on her shoulder, the other caressing Bruno's head. Liam and his mother arrived, and the youngster approached Bruno directly, crouched down next to him, and without hesitation put a painting on the ground. With kids all around, it was ideal. "You gave me everything," she said, leaning down and pressing her forehead to Bruno's. "You don't have to stay." Bruno let out a breath that sounded almost like a sigh of peace. The vet came to smoke, softly moved gently. Ella didn't let go, not until the very last breath left his body, slow and quiet like a leaf falling in the wind. And when it did, she didn't scream, she didn't run, she stayed. Bruno had taught her how to stay. She stayed until the sun shifted and the light no longer reached the stove. Then she stood. She folded the blanket Bruno had loved and placed it on the shelf by the window. She took Liam's hand and they walked outside together. Years passed. Ella grew. She finished school, studied psychology, and specialized in child development. When asked why, she always said the same thing: "A dog taught me how to listen." Now she worked in a quiet little therapy center just outside the city. The waiting room smelled faintly of crayons and coffee. The walls were lined with drawings, many of them from Liam, who still visited sometimes, now a teenager with a soft voice and steady hands. On her desks had a framed sketch Bruno in the sunlight, Liam by his side, drawn by a boy who once spoke only to a dog. Ella kept a worn leash in the top drawer. She never used it. She just liked knowing it was there. Outside the center, children played in the garden. Some ran, some rocked back and forth, some didn't speak at all. But Ella knew how to wait. She didn't push, she didn't hurry. She sat, and she listened. Sometimes she'd hum softly the way her mother once did, and every now and then a child would reach out, tentative, uncertain, and take her hand, and that was enough, because she remembered what it meant to be broken, to be quiet, to be lost. And she remembered what it meant to be found by a dog with one good eye, a slow tail, and a heart big enough to hold all her pain. What remained wasn't just memory, it was love and motion, and Ella carried it forward, one child, one story, one quiet afternoon at a time. It was a rainy afternoon when she saw him, a boy maybe 7, standing alone by the window of the Sense waiting room. His jacket was soaked, his fists clenched. Ella knelt beside him. "Rain's heavy today," she said softly. The boy didn't reply, but his eyes flicked toward the leash hanging by the door, an old faded one. Ella followed his gaze, smile that used to belong to someone very special. She whispered, still no words, but the boy's hand slowly reached out, brushing the leash with tentative fingers. Ella didn't push, she simply waited. Later that day, she found a sketch on the art table, crayon lines shaky but bold, a dog with one eye. Ella stood still for a long moment, her hand pressed to her chest. She didn't cry, she didn't need to, because Bruno was still here, in every quiet corner, in every gentle moment of trust, in every child who dared to reach out. Love, she had learned, doesn't vanish, it lingers, it circles back, it shows up in the unlikeliest places, in a boy with shaking hands and a crayon sketch, and a memory of a dog who stayed, and with her heart agape. Ella muttered, "I see you, old friend." She then grinned as she turned back to face the boy.